A crowded assembly sways on the Nix, voices rising from farmhands, potters and shipwrights, and a new rule is spoken. Athens will no longer be arranged by old clans, but by civic units built to mix the city. In the late 6th century BCE, Cleisthenes changed how people belonged, and therefore how power moved. The core idea is plain. He redesigned the map of citizenship so no single family or neighborhood could lock up the state. First, the problem his moment faced. Factional leaders had split Athens into rival camps, each rooted in region and kin. Because loyalty ran along family lines and local strongmen, assemblies had become contests of blocks rather than an audience of citizens. Cleisthenes' answer was not a speech, but a structure. He created new building blocks of the state and stacked them so old loyalties could not line up neatly, which meant a fisherman from the coast, a shepherd from the hills, and a mason from the town would count together inside the same political tribe. Let's define one unavoidable term in simple words. A deme is a local civic unit, like a neighborhood with its own register, officials, and shrines, where a citizen's public identity was recorded. Apply it here, and you see the pivot. After Cleisthenes, men were enrolled in Demes and carried their Dem names for life, not their father's clan alone. Around 508–507 BCE, Athens gained 10 new tribes built from dozens of Demes. Each tribe stitched together 3 slices of Attica, the city center, the inland hills, and the coast, so influence could not pile up in one place. Therefore, regional bosses could not deliver entire tribes on their own. They had to bargain with people they did not already command. Next came a thicker steering wheel for the state. Cleisthenes set the council at a rounded 500 members, 50 from each tribe, to prepare the agenda for the People's Assembly. Because the bulle rotated its leadership by tribes through the year, many citizens learned the routines of governance in turn. Daily life shifted in quiet but stubborn ways. At festivals and in courts, men were called by personal name and deme, Aristides of Allopeke, not just Aristides, son of so-and-so. At the deme level, neighbors chose local officials, kept tax and service lists, and cared for roads and shrines, which tied grand politics to familiar ground. The army and offices were also rebuilt to spread risk and practice. 10 generals, 1 from each tribe, were chosen so that strategy drew on the city's full range, not the retinue of a single household. Because offices were increasingly assigned by lot among qualified citizens, routine power began to circulate rather than settle. A principle hovered over the reform and gave it a name people could use. Some Athenians spoke of isonomia, which in plain words means equality under the law, the idea that rules apply the same way to those who share the status of citizen. By leaning on demes and tribes, Cleisthenes gave that principle a home address and a calendar. The machinery needed time to break in. Registers had to be written. Priests and magistrates learned new formulas. Maps were argued over because borders matter when they assign duty. Yet once the system moved, it carried a new habit, the expectation that many small selections would add up to public decisions. Because reforms never float above the human world, there were limits that must be said. Women, resident foreigners, and enslaved people were outside the circle of citizenship, even while they sustained the city that used the circle. If you were poor and lived far from town, the walk to the assembly was still long. Rules can mix constituencies, but they cannot erase distance. Still, the mixing mattered. A juror from the coast could sit beside a farmer from the inland and a shopkeeper from the Kerameikos, all sworn to listen to the same oaths. In that room, the city learned to hear itself without a herald from one faction speaking for everyone. Consider a simple scene of consequence. Her youth reaches the age for enrollment. Instead of his clan deciding, his deme assembly votes to place his name on the roll. From that day, his signature in court, his pay for public service, and his path to office run through the deme book, not an aristocrat's favor. Because the tribes were designed like braided ropes, festivals changed feel as well. Torch races, choruses, and processions were organized by tribes, which meant teammates came from far-flung neighborhoods. Competition stayed fierce, but the teams themselves were mixed, and mixed teams create mixed stories. The Council of 500 did more than shuffle papers. It set what the assembly would debate, called magistrates to account, examined new laws for conflicts, and sent out envoys with instructions. In practice, this meant the city's arguments arrived sorted and timed, and thousands of men learned the public script for asking and answering. There was innovation at the level of time, not just of space. The civic year was divided into 10 parts, one for each tribe to serve as prytany, the period when its 50 councillors acted as the executive committee. Therefore, leadership moved on a schedule visible to all, a calendar that taught citizens who held the keys this month and who would hold them next. Credit and authorship deserve a boundary line. Some later features, like ostracism, are linked to Cleisthenes in sources, but matured across the next decades. The first ostracisms come a handful of years after the reforms. It is enough here to say that his blueprint set the frame in which those practices made sense. Because design has downstream effects, naval power grew in a soil that Cleisthenes had tilled. When trireme crews drew pay and service lists from Demes and tribes, poor citizens found a regular place in the city's defense and in its pride. Rowing made the state strong at sea, and the state's paperwork made rowing a recognized service at home. Law courts reflected the new arithmetic as well. Large juries were drawn by lot across tribes to reduce bullying and bribery. Payments for service, modest at first, helped the less wealthy attend. This did not end pressure from elites, but it raised the cost of controlling a verdict in a scattered crowd. The reforms also had a cultural echo. Playwrights could joke about tribe rivalries and demi quirks because audiences recognized their new shared map. Local shrines thrived as administrative centers. Inscriptions multiplied. Memory became public writing rather than private boasting. Not everything was harmony. If a Dem gatekeeper was stubborn, a man might fight for years to prove his enrollment. If a tribe's leaders were lazy, its turn at prytany could sputter. Rules do not remove human frailty. They distribute it, so one failure cannot sink the ship. Step back to the mix and listen again. Because citizens arrived with their identities sorted by Demes and their business filtered by the council, speeches could aim at a city rather than a clan. Votes still swung with persuasion and fear, but the scene belonged to a people learning the discipline of shared procedure. Why did this work last? Because it taught the next generation what normal looked like. Names with Demes, offices by lot, tribes as teams, and a council humming behind the scenes. When habits line up with institutions, stability feels like common sense. Fix one anchor to carry with you. 10 tribes and a council of 500 became the skeleton of Athenian public life for a century that followed, through victories and disasters. Even when leaders changed and fortunes turned, the city kept returning to the same civic units to find its voice. Finally, the essence of the case lands in one sentence for our time of listening. Cleisthenes did not preach equality into existence. He built containers, demes and tribes, lots and councils, so that equality under law had places to live. Because he designed the rules that designed the citizens, the city learned to govern itself by paths that many feet could walk. The takeaway is simple and strong. Rules make the citizens who make the rules, and Cleisthenes' civic units turned a quarrel of factions into a people with procedures. If this open case file sharpened the past for you, like and subscribe for the next episode.